Fearless, relentless, and one of the most utterly brutal warriors to ever walk the face of the earth, with a body count somewhere in the high 100,000s, if not well into multiple millions, given just how long he's been around for. Many of you will already be well aware of SCP-076-2, also known as Abel. On the surface, he's a man of Middle Eastern descent, covered in tattoos of occult symbols and demonic faces, usually contained within a stone cube designated SCP-076-1. Abel will often emerge in a homicidal state, killing anyone and anything directly around him. How? Well, by any means available to him, but primarily by pulling a wide array of bladed weapons seemingly out of thin air. This is thanks to a tiny pocket dimension that only he can reach into, which is also always stocked with an assortment of deadly implements for his latest murder spree. As if being highly combat proficient and always armed didn't make him enough of an imposing threat, SCP-076-2 also possesses a near superhuman resistance to damage, making him incredibly difficult to take down. And even if someone is able to eventually neutralize him, Abel will also come back, resurrecting inside SCP-076-1 to fight another day. What you may not know is, for a time, Abel actually worked alongside the SCP Foundation, although nowadays they prefer to keep him locked away in a secure containment facility underwater, which they will flood with seawater if he ever escapes. But Abel was once appointed the leader of his own mobile task force, Omega-7, referred to under the codename of Pandora's Box. You see, the Foundation realized that SCP-076-2 held an especially high regard for those who proved, well, able to best him in combat. And it was this strange code of honor that Abel held that the Foundation hoped to exploit with the creation of Pandora's Box, comprised of MTF operatives that had earned Abel's respect, most by previously beating him in a fair fight, or as fair as a fight with a man who can summon swords through a tear in the fabric of reality can be. These agents would support Abel during missions in the field, during which the SCP Foundation were able to deploy the anomalous warrior in various tactical engagements. However, this didn't last long. Eventually, Abel grew tired of carrying out the orders of the Foundation. The immortal warrior craved a challenge, breaking free of containment and turning on the Foundation, resulting in Abel being neutralized by an on-site nuclear weapon. This marked the end of the fragile alliance between SCP-076-2 and the SCP Foundation, leaving the existence of Omega-7 a classified secret and one of the organization's most embarrassing missteps. Well, but what if that hadn't happened? What if out there in the infinite multiverse, there was a world where Abel had been allowed to remain a part of Omega-7 and the mobile task force was never disbanded? Well, you're about to find out. In our world, Abel's dissatisfaction with being a member of Pandora's Box first became apparent when he began putting the rest of his unit through live fire exercises, brutalizing his men despite these exercises being intended as for training purposes only. But in this world, the injuries and even casualties Abel inflicted on the rest of Omega-7 were met with a much different response. The O5 Council of this alternate version of the SCP Foundation viewed Abel's outbursts during training as acceptable losses. Every time he would injure one of Omega-7, the Council would demand that replacements be on hand to become part of the task force, drawn from the ranks of the other MTFs at their disposal. After all, Abel was a valuable asset for carrying out the Foundation's dirty work. By continually replenishing his team with reserves from their seemingly inexhaustible supply of other MTF agents, the O5 Council of this world were able to keep SCP-076-2 firmly under their employ. However, it is also important to note that Abel's patience for these new recruits was far more limited than the original Omega-7s. Those men had all been hand-picked by Abel personally and appointed to the project, given that he had some modicum of respect for them as combatants, whereas all of their replacements were plucked at random from the Foundation's other MTFs. As a result, SCP-076-2 would carelessly kill or wound more and more of these reserves during combat missions, hardly distinguishing between friend and foe. But despite this, the O5 Council refused to discontinue the Omega-7 project, viewing these as acceptable losses, and letting the success rate of Abel's missions justify the depletion of their other mobile task forces. Under Abel's leadership and the command of the O5 Council, Omega-7 would become the Foundation's primary rapid response unit and the most deployed task force for dangerous field operations. And working for the Foundation meant that every field mission was a highly dangerous one. Such was the case during one containment breach, where SCP-682 managed to get free of its acid tank. A rampaging, infinitely adaptable, hard-to-destroy reptile on the loose, slaughtering all in its path was bad enough. But the O5 Council had received intel that there was something more behind this breakout than it first seemed. And so Abel and the rest of his latest Omega-7 team were sent in to pacify SCP-682. Bursting into the facility, eager to once again be freed from containment and the monotonous, underwhelming experience of training, Abel flew into combat. Drawing black swords from his personal armory, he began to tear through everything and everyone in his path. Unfortunately for the Foundation personnel on site, this also meant they were subject to Abel's relentless wrath. As if running away from SCP-682 wasn't bad enough, fleeing research staff were quickly met with the swing of SCP-076-2's weapons and removed from the premises in a brutal fashion. Still, this meant little to Abel, and even less to the O5 Council. As far as they were concerned, even their own staff were just collateral damage, more acceptable losses justified by Abel's perfect record for successful high-risk, high-reward field missions. However, that perfect record was about to be tarnished for good. You see, this containment breach wasn't your average SCP-682 escape attempt. It was instead a situation that had been meticulously planned and carried out for one purpose. This breach was intended specifically to draw Abel out. Since he had become the SCP Foundation's primary weapon in response to danger in the field, a particularly devious third party had begun to take note. The Chaos Insurgency, a splinter faction that began its life as an off-the-books Black Ops unit for the Foundation themselves, had been monitoring Abel's deployment by the O5 Council. In this universe, their origin was the same as in ours, and the Insurgency took a certain disdain to seeing an anomalous individual carrying out the kind of operations their group had been formed to undertake for the Foundation. Additionally, the use of SCP-076-2 as a personal attack dog by the O5 Council is hypocrisy. The Insurgency believed in the practical application of anomalies, rather than locking them up and keeping them contained. And it was for this belief that they had been vilified by the Foundation. And yet, here was the same organization sending Abel on missions, with no care for the harm he caused. And so, as a result, the Chaos Insurgency had conducted an operation to break into the Foundation, free SCP-682, and send the hard-to-destroy reptile on a rampage, also they could take their shot at Abel. Being ambushed by a group of Chaos Insurgency operatives on his way to engage SCP-682, Abel was admittedly caught by surprise. But by now, his combat prowess was second to almost nobody else in the world. The insurgents dogpiled on Abel, unleashing every ounce of firepower they had brought to bear on the immortal warrior. The ensuing firefight destroyed an entire wing of the Foundation facilities, explosive weapons being detonated in the hopes that the Insurgency could subdue Abel. All the while, SCP-076-2 shrugged off the oncoming damage, catching rockets that were launched at him and throwing them back in the direction of the Chaos Insurgents. It was a bloodbath. Nearly the entire Omega-7 team that had accompanied Abel and provided him with fire support were lying dead. The same could also be said for the Insurgency's forces too, though, with each of them being gradually felled by the warrior's many weapons. But by this point, Abel was approaching exhaustion, and there was still one more enemy left standing. It had been unfurling destruction all on its own, angrily devouring the few Foundation personnel that were left. And now the scaly form of SCP-682 came lumbering around the corner. The battle was brutal. In this universe, Abel and the hard-to-destroy reptile had never crossed paths before. But SCP-682 could smell the difference in Abel's physiology, his innate ability to resist damage and resurrect time and time again. The creature already held disdain for anything and everything living, and so presented with a man who technically couldn't stop living, SCP-682 entered an unstoppable rage state, taking the exhausted Abel down with ease. But losing in a grudge match against SCP-682 wasn't quite as bad as things were about to get for Abel. Reviving inside of his stone sarcophagus, the ancient warrior was confused. The Foundation weren't letting him out. It had been a long time, years even, since he had last died, even temporarily. Over the course of all of his Omega-7 missions, he hadn't needed to reappear back inside SCP-076-1 for quite a considerable while, and now that he had, a very large seed of doubt had been sown. The O5 Council were furious, just as angry at SCP-076-2's apparent failure as Abel was. The perfect operational track record of their top anomalous asset was now tarnished. The question started to spread through the Council members. If their sword-wielding, virtually invulnerable secret weapon wasn't as effective as they had previously thought, then what was the use of continuing to deploy Abel? And so began a debate within the O5 Council upon what was to be the fate of SCP-076-2. In this universe, he had served the Foundation well, but a weapon that is only effective even 90% of the time still leaves a margin of error. It was that risk, that potential for error, knowing that Abel wouldn't always succeed in his missions, that caused the O5 Council to reconsider his applications as a field operative. There were some in the Council who argued that this was a highly specific, isolated incident. The Chaos Insurgency had specifically engineered the SCP-682 escape as a way to draw Abel out, after all. Just because he failed this time did not indicate a pattern of failure, but this argument was eventually shot down, especially when the Foundation's Ethics Committee decided to throw in their 2 cents. They demanded Abel's status as a field agent be revoked and levied for the immediate disbanding for the Omega-7 project. Pulling replacements for that task force from other MTFs at the Foundation had left them with a significantly depleted reserve of troops. And then came the argument about just how acceptable the losses were when Abel was let loose. A decision was ultimately made to, for at least the moment, rescind SCP-076-2's field operative privileges and suspend any further development of or recruitment into Omega-7. However, there was one crucial factor that nobody on the Council had taken into consideration when they made their verdict, and that was how badly Abel would react to the news. As you may have already predicted, Abel was furious to hear he would be held in containment until further notice. His anger stemmed not from his defeat at the jaws of SCP-682, but at how quick the Foundation seemingly was to question his combat prowess. He lost one battle out of hundreds, thousands even, and all of a sudden the O5 Council were going to lock him away, all because of one defeat?
You dare?
Abel bellowed when he was given the news.
I am the greatest warrior on this planet and have been made a pawn by your Foundation. I give you my strength, my skill, and the moment I falter, you turn your back on me? You dare! I will show you what real power looks like!
Overcome with rage, it didn't take long for Abel to force his way out of containment. He'd been active as a field agent within the Foundation for so long now that he had long since figured out a way to escape his underwater prison before the emergency containment measures had a chance to stop him. As he broke free, he made sure to take down plenty of security staff along the way, and to make matters worse, he didn't stop there. Before long, Abel was on a warpath against the SCP Foundation. Every few days, reports would come in of a massacre at a Foundation facility. Security footage recovered from the wreckage after each incident would show Abel arriving primed for battle, a sword in each hand. By the time he left after his brutal, remorseless attack, he'd be drenched in the blood of the entire site's personnel. The Foundation had little in its once huge arsenal to fight back with. Given the number of MTF agents reassigned to Omega-7, their forces were far more limited, if not almost depleted. They dispatched detachments to clean up the wake of Abel's destruction, but not one squad sent after the anomalous warrior came back alive. Part of the problem was, the Foundation couldn't predict where Abel would show up next, or which of their sites he knew about and was planning to hit. From their perspective, his attacks were spontaneous, the result of rage at the Foundation, but without any premeditated plan in mind. And that was exactly what Abel wanted them to think. By seeming to attack at random, he was therefore able to cover the true intention behind each engagement. He was looking for something. During his considerable time leading Omega-7, he had heard about a machine that could improve anything placed inside of it. SCP-914, better known as the Clockworks, and before long, Abel found what he was looking for. By the time the Foundation realized what the Unstoppable Warrior's plan was, it was already too late. Abel was storming into the facility that housed SCP-914 with no intention of leaving until he'd used it. The Foundation had banned testing of biological matter within the Clockworks, but Abel wasn't beholden to their rules anymore. In fact, he barely was when he'd worked with them before. Cutting down guards and researchers, survivors fleeing in terror, Abel stepped up towards the massive gears and cogs, the clockwork components that made up SCP-914. He wasted no time, setting the machine to very fine. With this setting, the Clockworks would take whatever was in the input booth and improve it, usually by giving it anomalous properties, or in the case of Abel, by giving him further anomalous properties. Stepping inside, the whir of machinery drowned out the emergency alarms as Abel reached his goal, to become the ultimate warrior, the embodiment of the very concept itself. Racing to the scene, a chopper cleared the smoke as it approached. Under an emergency executive order from the O5 Council, the few surviving remnants of the Foundation's mobile task forces had been combined into a singular strike team. There were not many left, considering how many others from their units had been previously siphoned into Omega-7, only to die as collateral damage in the team's missions with Abel.
Remember, SCP-076-2 is a priority target!
The field commander barked, while the MTF strike team held their guns nervously aboard the aircraft.
Primary objective is to neutralize him by any means. Reports indicate that he may be trying to access SCP-914, so be advised!
An almighty explosion boomed through the airborne vehicle, engulfing the cockpit in flames.
Mayday! 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 Chopper 1 has been hit! We're going down!
The commander radioed to Foundation Command.
Everyone brace yourselves for impact!
The helicopter spiraled out of the air, crashing to the ground in a twisted hunk of metal. The surviving members of the strike team scrambled out of the wreckage, hauling the more badly wounded out of the ruined aircraft.
Contact!
Someone yelled in horror.
Enemy contact behind us!
The remaining Foundation foot soldiers turned and drew their weapons, opening fire on something suspended a few feet in the air above them. A hail of gunfire rang out as the team opened fire the second they saw who it was. It was Abel, and he was flying. Floating above them, his hair whipped in the wind. The oncoming storm of bullets seemed to ricochet off his skin. In actuality, they weren't even hitting him, melting away before they could make contact. They might as well have been firing pea shooters for how little effect their guns had. The barrage only stopped when one of the strike team launched a short-range rocket at the newly refined warrior. It detonated, but when the smoke from the blast cleared, Abel was still hovering in the air without so much as a scratch. "My turn," he announced. Reaching into his pocket dimension, Abel pulled something out. Not a weapon, not yet. Instead, it was a formless, dark, shadowy mass that moved like liquid metal, reacting to the movement of his hand. As he drew the substance out, it reformed, seemingly at Abel's command. And it wasn't just swords he could create now. Drawing on his experiences from his Omega-7 missions, any weapon that Abel had previously seen or could think of, he now had at his disposal. The strike team looked up in horror as a veritable swarm of black, non-reflective constructs hovered in the air on either side of Abel, each one in the shape of a rocket. Flinging both arms towards the Foundation troops, Abel sent his new creations raining down on them. The strike team turned heel and fled for their lives, although none of them got very far. Abel's rockets engulfed the area around them in a volley of explosions, leaving not a single thing standing. He had just effortlessly built an airstrike from virtually thin air and thrown it at the Foundation's last remaining MTF agents. And he wasn't done there. With his newfound powers, Abel's campaign of destruction swept the entire world. In a last act of desperation, the SCP Foundation offered freedom to any anomaly that permanently took down SCP-076-2. They all flooded out of containment to take their shot. The Plague Doctor, the Shy Guy, the Spectre. But they barely slowed Abel down. His new constructs were devastating weapons, taking the form of not just blades, but projectiles of every size and shape, all of them lethal. Before long, Abel had lain waste to the entire Foundation, but still, he wanted more. SCP-914 hadn't just improved Abel's existing anomalous powers and granted him the ability to fly at supersonic speeds. In doing so, it had amplified his range, too. He loathed the human race and sought to absolutely decimate every single living thing. No one could best him in combat now, and in his mind, twisted by anger, not one of them was worthy of his respect. He tore planes apart with his bare hands, smashed tanks to pieces, and leveled entire cities with his unlimited weapons. It took a few years, maybe a decade at the most, but by the end of it, Abel sat atop a pile of billions upon billions of bones. With his refined abilities, he had done something unthinkable, committed omnicide. He had killed everyone in the world. Of course, this was indeed another world, one different to ours. Luckily here, our version of Abel is still locked up underwater, but somewhere out there, there is an Abel who is watching the sun rising over an entirely dead world, his world. Want to own an SCP of your own? Go to scpswag.com for premium anomalous merchandise. Now, to see the result of more anomalous experiments with the Clockworks, go and check out What If SCP-096 Was Put Inside SCP-914? And SCP-914, What Did You Put in It? For more Clockworks-related stories.